Yo YouTube, Jay from the Forgotten Arc, back with another video. So last time out I reviewed Yami in this series, and I'm kind of glad I got him out of the way. I was never the biggest fan of his character. I do feel like he plays the typical dumb villain that we get in most anime and manga nowadays. But today I'm moving on to one of the more interesting characters of the Bleach universe, Mr. Let's Fight Anywhere, Anytime, Anyplace, Kenpachi Zaraki. Just like the Yami video, this is not a power scaling video. There's plenty of great channels that do that already. It's just more of a theoretical video where I'll be looking at the source material, his journey, and his powers and abilities, and then coming up with my conclusion on whether he as a character is brilliant or broken. Let's do it. So before we take a look at his abilities shown throughout the series in his major fights, I do want to go back to the start of Kenpachi's story, as I feel it perfectly sews together all the threads of his story and abilities in a chronological order. His story starts as a young boy in Zaraki, the name of one of the most brutal and violent districts in the Rokongai, which he subsequently used as his surname due to not having his own name to go by. He stole a nameless sword from a dead Shinigami, which he then uses as his own sword. This is told to us by Nemaya, creator of the Asauchi, who also states that with due diligence and training, the Asauchi can then be forged into its own unique Zanpakuto. So some other facts that we know about Zanpakutos that we are told throughout the series correlate directly to Kenpachi's abilities in the fights that we see. The main ones that I wanted to point out are the following. A Zanpakuto's shape and abilities are based on their Shinigami's soul. Once a Shinigami learns his or her Zanpakuto's name, they can communicate with one another and grow stronger together. So immediately we can then deduce that Kenpachi's fighting strength with his sword from the beginning of the series would be greatly reduced due to him not knowing his Zanpakuto's name, therefore not allowing them to grow together. The next fact we do know are that Zanpakuto are born with their Shinigami and they die along with their Shinigami. So Kenpachi's theft of the Zanpakuto that he got the Asauchi from, we can assume that the Zanpakuto spirit, if the user did have one, died alongside the Shinigami that he stole it from. So it left Kenpachi with a blank Asauchi that he could then imprint his Zanpakuto spirit on. The next fact that we do know is that the Zanpakuto's name is the name of the living spirit which empowers the sword and lends its strength to the Shinigami who wields it, which again, this just shows us that Kenpachi would not be fighting with his sword strength, as from the beginning of the series, it has no name. Lastly, and the one I find pretty interesting, is a Zanpakuto can determine if its wielder is worthy of its power. Based on this, the Zanpakuto may choose not to give its true Bankai name and its full potential if it feels the wielder is not worthy. So this I will come back to once we get into the latter half of this video. So continuing with the story in a chronological order, we eventually see Yachiru Unohana, who's on the search for a worthy successor to the title of Kenpachi, which she currently holds at that time. It's given to the strongest Shinigami of that era. She comes across a young Zaraki next to a pile of bodies, and during their fight they both experience the thrill of the fight, which is something that both parties, due to their respective strengths, have not found in the majority of the opponents that they have both faced in the past. This is in particular some testament to young Kenpachi's strength, as it shows that he can not only keep up with her at such a young age, but also Unohana actually reveals that he's actually stronger than her at that point. Kenpachi at this point yearns to keep this feeling he experiences in the fight with Unohana. Due to Unohana's strength, the fear of potentially losing adds to the thrill of the fight for Kenpachi, and this thrill is something that he rarely comes across. He subconsciously begins to seal his own power in order to prolong the fight with her, and due to this, Kenpachi actually loses the fight. We see after the fight is over that Unohana remarks that he is worthy of the title of Kenpachi. We'll jump a little bit forward in the story now and join Kenpachi as a young man, where he comes across a baby Yachiru who does not seem fazed by his appearance or sword drenched in blood. He names her after Unohana due to his admiration for Unohana after the fight they had. He also reflects on the pain of not having a name and decides to name himself Kenpachi. It's interesting to note here that the title of Kenpachi can only be used by the strongest Shinigami in every generation. So if Unohana, who in her generation was the strongest, you would assume that Zaraki would need to defeat her in order to officially gain the title. More on that later. He officially gains the title by beating the captain of the 11th Division, so we're skipping forward again now to when he becomes a captain. That 11th Division captain holds the name of Kenpachi also, and our Kenpachi, who kills him, then gains the aforementioned title of Kenpachi and also qualification for captaincy in the Gote 13. This is by him passing the 3rd captain qualification trial, which is trial by combat. Unohana, as we actually see later, actually moved from the 11th Division, where she was originally captain, to the 4th. So I theorize here that she probably, after her fight with Kenpachi, relinquished the title due to her feeling like she actually should have lost to him. So now we have a bit of backstory which shows Kenpachi's origin. Let's jump forward again now to his first major fight with Ichigo during the Soul Society invasion. Now at this point, Kenpachi's actually placed several strong limiters on himself in order to limit his powers so he can enjoy the fight and gain the desired thrill that he experienced against Unohana so long ago. Now in my opinion, these limiters do severely hinder Kenpachi's fighting ability, more so than any other character in the Bleach series. So let me quickly list them. Firstly, he has his bells, which he wears on the ends of the spikes on his hair, and they allow for opponents to determine his position. Ichigo actually takes advantage of this in their fight. Secondly, he has his eye patch, which greatly reduces his Reiatsu to, we're not sure of the exact percentage, but I would imagine it to be considerably huge, considering that whenever he does take it off in his fights, he does seem to receive a gigantic boost. He actually removes this as well in the fight of Ichigo, which should have killed Ichigo, but you know, plot armor logic doesn't really apply to main characters. But anyway, the third limiter that he has is he still doesn't know the name of his sword, which, as we saw earlier, him not knowing the name of his sword actually limits his abilities and his in syncness with his sword, so he wouldn't be able to use it to its full potential. Fourth, at this point, we do find it out later, but at this point, he has no formal swordsman training, as it was stopped by Central 46, the government essentially in the Bleach universe, as they recognized Kenpachi's potential and were scared that he would become a major problem if he rebelled. And the last limiter that he actually places upon himself is self-imposed again, and it's where he normally fights with one arm instead of using two arms, which, as we see later on in the series, he can actually do. Fighting in this way during the start of the series greatly drops his attack strength yet again. So as you see, Kenpachi with all these limiters could actually only be fighting at about 25 or 30% of his actual full strength that he could have. And that's crazy to me, just considering the amount of opponents that he does beat throughout the series with all these caveats against him. It's crazy. So in the aftermath of Kenpachi's fight against Ichigo, he feels like he actually lost the fight, despite actually collapsing after Ichigo did. But again, Ichigo's the main character, so I can't really argue the result. He actually then fights two of his fellow captains, Kaname Tosen and Komamura, who confront him for helping the Soul Society intruders. He completely destroys Tosen and shows great perceptiveness in figuring out how to overcome Tosen's Bankai, which may have scared most regular Shinigami due to its effect of depriving you of your senses. He actually seems ready to deal the final blow to Tosen, but Komamura intervenes. Him and Komamura also get ready to throw down, but are actually interrupted by the commotion occurring nearby, so they abandon the fight. So without many other major incidents, Kenpachi at the end of the Soul Society arc, he actually goes toe to toe with the main character, who I feel was on near captain level, and by my own stubbornness, I give him the win. I don't care what Ichigo says, I give him the win as he was the last man standing. He beats Kaname Tosen, who's a captain that's proficient in sword fighting, and Kaname Tosen's actually in full sync with his Zanpakuto, so he has that on his side. I also do feel he would have beat Komamura if the fight was not interrupted, as he was about to use his Bankai and Kenpachi still had his eye patch on, so he fought against Tosen with his eye patch on the entire time and was about to fight Komamura with his eye patch on. Kenpachi has a change of heart after his fight with Ichigo, and we see that he wants to actually learn his Zanpakuto's name in order to get stronger. His initial stance of Ichigo being weak due to fighting alongside his Zanpakuto probably stemmed from Kenpachi's own insecurities in regards to being alone for the majority of his pre-Soul Society days, and not having a name of his own. Therefore, that probably gave him the mindset that he should operate by himself and his own strength, in order to not feel that he needs help from anybody or anything. He has got by on his own strength just fine until this point. So his eyes being open to the possibility that he could accept his sword as a companion after the fight of Ichigo is pretty interesting to see. For a character that is displayed as violent and semi-braggadocious, it's interesting to see this moment of introspection from Kenpachi and resolve for him to fix his flaws in order for him to get stronger. So skipping forward quite a bit in the story, we see that Kenpachi is sent to Las Noches in preparation for the upcoming battle with their rancor. Kenpachi actually confronts Noitara, the 5th ranked Espada and a notably strong opponent with the hardest hero of all the Espada past and present. After entertaining back and forth, Kenpachi actually adjusts his combat strategy on the fly to boost his cutting strength by increasing his Reiatsu output in order to damage Noitara's hero skin. He damages Noitara to the point where Noitara is actually forced to use his resurrection. This increases his strength, which then prompts Kenpachi to reluctantly use Kendo. As he says in his own words, he actually doesn't want to die. This technique was taught to him by Old Man Yama when he first became a captain, and he actually has knowledge of this skill when he fights Ichigo, so he again just chooses not to use this. Seeing this acceptance of actually wanting to use proficient and proper swordman techniques shows growth in his character and possibly alludes to the fact that he wants to prolong his life, maybe to actually get to know his sword and get stronger and test his limits, or equally it could be because of the love of his division and Yachiru. Either way, when he uses this technique, the fight ends almost instantly and Noitoro is actually cut down by 2 powerful strikes. Kenpachi later runs into the number 1 Espada in the same arc. Him and Byakuya actually fight the strongest Espada, Yami, in combat. This fight is not actually shown on screen, but in the aftermath of the war, we see that both Byakuya and Kenpachi note that the fight actually wasn't that interesting, and we cut back to Yami, who we see has been defeated and eventually he dies. Again, this is a testament to both Kenpachi and Byakuya's strength, that they were actually able to defeat the number 1 Espada. Essentially, he ranked higher than all of the Espada that went with Aizen to the fake Karakura town. So Kenpachi and Byakuya were actually able to beat an opponent that ranked higher than the opponents that fought Shunsui, Ukitake, Toshiro, and Soifon, which is a pretty notable feat. So at the end of this actual arc, we see that Kenpachi is still using his eye patch as a general limiter to his enormous Ryatsu, and he's even upset at it getting knocked off by accident. He still operates with a nameless Zanpakuto, which further decreases his strength. He still has his bells on, and he still prefers to not utilize formal swordsman techniques, although we do see, as I mentioned before, that he's actually starting to warm up on this and will use them when needed. This leads to the 1000-Year Blood War arc, where the Shinigami are preparing for war after the invasion of the Quincy. Kenpachi runs into Yuha and Hashwolf after beating 3 Sternritters, namely those with the designations Q, R, and Y, who upon their arrival were reported to have spiritual pressure comparable to a level greater than or equal to a captain level Shinigami. This is all the more impressive as he takes care of them with relative ease in comparison to some of his companions, who are having issues all over the Soul Society with the invading Quincy. He then engages Yuha in battle and is swiftly defeated by him. It is revealed later that this was not in fact Yuha, but Royd Lloyd, brother of Lloyd Lloyd, who Kenpachi had already defeated, as mentioned earlier. A major point of contention I have here is that both of the Lloyd brothers have the designation Y, which stands for yourself, which allows them to copy enemies' likenesses, and they are both considered to be captain level or stronger. But the brother that can copy his opponent's powers and abilities was defeated by Kenpachi, as his weakness is, if the user he copies gets much stronger than when he was copied, then he won't be able to match the user's strength. So in this case, when Kenpachi actually got stronger than at the point where the Lloyd brother copied him, that would mean that he wouldn't be able to handle Kenpachi, and Kenpachi, as he stated when he met Yuha, swiftly and quickly defeated him. But Royd Lloyd, who imitates Yuha, can only copy along with the person's appearance, their memories and personality. So how could he defeat Kenpachi and fight Yamamoto equally with the base ability he has, which is stated to be equal or slightly greater than captain level? My money is actually on the majority of the Sternritter being equal to captain, but not stronger than them. There is no mention of either of the Lloyd brothers being a part of the elite guard, who I feel comprise of the strongest Sternritter minus Gremmy, Ugram, Uryu, and a few others. So I feel Royd Lloyd's base ability cannot be higher than Kenpachi's, especially considering that Royd cannot copy or use Yuha's powers and abilities. I feel that this was not thought through properly by Kubo, and was mainly put in to create more shock value in terms of Kenpachi's sudden defeat, and give him a more solid reason to want to get stronger. I don't really mind that, but it was just done really dumb in my opinion. Kenpachi could have wanted to get stronger by just seeing the devastation in the Soul Society after the Quincy invasion, or Kubo could have had Hashwolf defeat Kenpachi, as his designation, the balance, could have realistically been too much for Kenpachi to handle. So we move on to seeing after Shunsui's meeting with Central 46 that he resolves to ask Unohana to train Kenpachi in order for him to learn Zanjutsu, another technique that he does not have any mastery of, so he can get stronger in order to fight the Quincy. She obliges and the stage is set for their rematch that was years in the making. In this rematch, Unohana actually points out one of Kenpachi's major self-imposed limitations that we identified earlier, his tendency to fight with one arm. Kenpachi calls her out for using several cheap tricks in the fight, and during the battle, Unohana actually severely wounds Kenpachi but heals him almost instantly. She reflects that her sin was born in the original fight, and that doing this would help to remove the limits Kenpachi has placed upon himself. This continuous wounding and revival helps to slowly remove the seals, and eventually, Kenpachi starts to tip the balance of the fight in his favour, and overpowers Unohana and kills her. Due to Kenpachi once again feeling the thrill of the fight, he begs Unohana not to die. She expresses that her duty is fulfilled and there are plenty of strong opponents to fight. In the immediate aftermath of the fight, he also hears the voice of his Zanpakuto for the very first time. Sometime later, he engages in combat with Sternritter V, the Visionary, Gremmy, And here Kenpachi, despite being up against a man that can literally bring his imagination into life, still manages to cut through the various constructs that Gremmy imagines. This includes a meteor that worries the majority of the Sternritter, including Hashwolf, who's visibly concerned at the sight of the meteor. Kenpachi just sees it as another thing to cut and releases his Shikai Nozarashi for the first time in order to cut the meteor into pieces. Gremmy eventually tires of this and says he will imagine himself being stronger than Kenpachi, and his body actually explodes due to not being able to contain the massive Ryatsu that Kenpachi's body can. Both of these fights with Unohana and Gremmy were both excellently paced, and I can't wait to see them animated in the returning anime. Both fights show that Kenpachi's power actually is strengthened due to his limiters being removed and him using his sword's potential for the very first time. His last major fight in the series is with Gerard Valkyrie, the Miracle, in which the miracle designation that Gerard has makes him nigh on impossible to kill due to his fortune turning in his favour whenever it should be misfortune for him. It's literally a miracle. Kenpachi still manages to impress by cutting Gerard various times and going toe to toe with him, but he is eventually overwhelmed, and this is where it gets really interesting. Yachiru, who had disappeared after the fight Kenpachi had with Gremmy when he released his Shikai, reappears on the battlefield, urging Kenpachi to keep fighting, and if he used her properly, there would be nothing he could not cut down. She eventually gives him the power of Bankai. His new unnamed Bankai, which resembles a crazed demon, effortlessly overpowers Gerard, who is forced into activating his Volstein dig. Kenpachi is unfazed by this and cleaves Gerard into two. In normal circumstances, this should have been the end for Gerard, but his designation allows for him to piece himself together, and Kenpachi's Bankai eventually breaks his arm due to the overwhelming power and rules him out for the rest of the fight. Yachiru even remarks that she's released too much of his power, further implying that she's actually a part of his sword, as most of the theories suggest. The revelation that Yachiru, his vice captain, was most likely a part of his sword is something we'll actually delve into a tiny bit later, so in lieu of this, let's look at how his character is positioned at the end of the series. So number 1, Kenpachi no longer chooses to wear his bells. This possibly hints towards Kenpachi's mind state changing, and perhaps he now thinks he cannot allow for his opponents to have a chance to beat him. Maybe this is due to what is at stake for both himself, his subordinates, and the rest of the Soul Society. Maybe him also losing Yachiru in her physical state probably influenced his decision to seemingly take his position as a captain more seriously. Secondly, Kenpachi now knows the name of his sword, and he's actively working on training his Shikai and Bankai. Next, Kenpachi's subconscious seals have been broken by Unohana, which allows for him to actually fulfill his potential that he showed back in his childhood. And lastly, his Zanpakuto spirit, which is heavily hinted to be Yachiru, is finally in communication with him. This is a complete 360 from the character that we saw at the beginning of the series, if you look at what he lacked then and what he has gained now. I believe this character is one of Kubo's best, and barring a minor glitch here and there, he does have a complete roller coaster of trials and tribulations built up over years of good writing, and he ends the series on a high, having achieved the goal that he set out to do in the end of the Soul Society arc, which was to communicate with his sword and get stronger. Perhaps his sword spirit required him to be introspective, as we saw at the end of the Soul Society arc, and this put him in the path of unlocking his sword spirit fully. I feel Yachiru could possibly have been manifested due to Kenpachi's enormous spiritual pressure. He states back in the Soul Society arc that his sword is always in a released state, so it would not be far-fetched to think that his excessive Ryatsu, combined with his initial desire to not know or need his sword, may have caused Yachiru to materialize of her own accord in the real world. Kenpachi is truly a brilliant character, and as I said, one of Kubo's best. He ends the series as the true Kenpachi, and I feel his current ability at the end of the series and potential makes him the strongest captain in the Gotei 13. But that's another topic for another time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please let me know any topics you'd like to see me dive into next. I'm always open to suggestions and feedback. Till next time, peace.